Why most men fail. The final test of their emotional resilience today. You think the final test of emotional resilience happens when life hits you hard, but that's not the real test. The real test happens when life goes quiet, when nothing breaks on the outside, but everything unstable inside you starts begging for relief. Most people don't fail because they feel too much. They fail because they cannot stand what their feelings reveal. They cannot stand the silence. They cannot stand the distance. They cannot stand the moment reality refuses to match the story they were desperately trying to believe. And before we go deeper, subscribe to this channel, not because I need a number, but because you need reminders. You need clarity in a world that keeps feeding you comfort, distraction, and emotional confusion. If you want truth that pulls you back to yourself, subscribe and stay close to this message. Here's what this really means. Emotional resilience is not staying calm when everything goes your way. It is not looking composed when people are watching. It is not posting strength. It is not performing indifference. Emotional resilience is what you do when you are not chosen, not validated, not reassured, not immediately rewarded, and you still refuse to betray your standards. That is the test. That has always been the test. The misconception is simple. People think emotional strength means intensity under control. They think if they can speak with confidence, if they can keep a straight face, if they can explain themselves well enough, if they can fight hard enough for what they want, then they are strong. No, sometimes that is not strength. Sometimes that is panic in a polished suit. Sometimes that is fear with good vocabulary. Sometimes that is need wearing the costume of passion. That's called emotional dependence. And emotional dependence is dangerous because it lies to you. It tells you that your pain means you must act now. It tells you that discomfort is an emergency. It tells you that silence must be filled, distance must be closed, ambiguity must be solved, and rejection must be overturned. But not every feeling deserves a reaction. Not every ache deserves a message. Not every loss deserves pursuit. Not every unanswered question deserves your energy. Some things are not asking you to act, they are asking you to see. That is the hard truth. The final test of emotional resilience is not whether you can hold on, it is whether you know when to stop. You stop chasing, you stop explaining, you stop volunteering your dignity to places that have already shown you their position. You stop confusing obsession with commitment. You stop confusing attention with care. You stop confusing longing with alignment. You stop. Why is that so hard for people? Because the real addiction was never the person, never the outcome, never the approval. The real addiction was relief. Relief from uncertainty, relief from self doubt, relief from the uncomfortable possibility that you might have to sit alone with your own mind and find out what is actually running you. That's the root cause. People are not just avoiding pain, they are avoiding revelation. Because if you stay still long enough, you will see it. You will see how much of your identity was built on response, on being wanted, on being needed, on being seen a certain way, on getting the text back, on hearing the apology, on receiving the invitation, on being chosen by people who were never qualified to define your worth in the first place. And when that response disappears, you panic because now you have to meet the version of yourself that has no audience. That's called exposure. That's called truth. Look at the pattern. Someone pulls away and you don't get clear. You get louder, you get more available, you get more emotional. You offer more explanation, more patience, more chances, more access, more of yourself. Why? Because part of you thinks if you give enough, they will finally become what you hoped they were. But hope is not a strategy. Wishful thinking is not discernment. And overextending yourself does not prove your heart is pure. Sometimes it proves your boundaries are weak. People love the fantasy because fantasy protects the ego. Fantasy says, if I just say it better, they'll understand. Fantasy says, if I hold on a little longer, they'll change. Fantasy says, if I stay available, they'll finally value me. Reality says something much colder and much cleaner. If someone is unclear, believe the confusion. If someone is inconsistent, believe the pattern. If someone only reaches for you when it benefits them, believe the timing. Reality does not need decoration, it only asks for courage. And that is where most people fail the final test. Not in the pain itself, but in their refusal to interpret the pain honestly. They would rather chase illusion than face what is true. They would rather negotiate with the obvious than grieve it. They would rather stay attached to potential than disciplined in reality. Presence versus silence, reality versus fantasy, attachment versus discipline. This is the battlefield. So, what happens when you fail this test? You leak energy everywhere. You become reactive. You lose focus. Your self respect gets traded for temporary emotional relief. You start monitoring people instead of mastering yourself. You start checking, waiting, replaying, hoping, predicting. Your mind becomes a prison built out of maybe, and the cost is never small. It steals your peace, it steals your time, it steals your standards. It makes you forget your work, your body, your purpose, your habits, your future. You begin building your entire emotional climate around things you cannot control. That's called surrendering your center. And the brutal part is this: the world will not always stop you when you are abandoning yourself. People will let you overgive. They will let you explain too much. They will let you stay too long. They will let you keep proving your loyalty while they keep proving your blindness. Why would they interrupt a dynamic that benefits them? Why would a pattern correct itself just because you are sincere? Sincerity without discernment is self harm with good intentions. Now, listen carefully. Silence is not weakness. Distance is not cruelty. Detachment is not a game. In mature hands, these are tools. Silence gives you information. Distance gives you perspective. Detachment gives you truth. Not so you can manipulate other people, not so you can make them chase, not so you can control the room, but so you can finally hear yourself without interference, so you can observe the pattern without your desperation editing the footage, so you can remember that self respect sometimes sounds like no response, looks like one step back, and feels like withdrawal from chaos. When you stop reacting instantly, you start seeing clearly. When you stop filling every silence, you start hearing the deeper message. When you stop negotiating with misalignment, you start protecting your life. This is the reframe. The final test of emotional resilience is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming clean. Clean in your thinking, clean in your standards, clean in your actions. No begging, no performing, no self abandonment disguised as love, loyalty, patience, or understanding. You do not need to harden your heart. You need to strengthen your frame. There is a difference. A hardened heart says, I will feel nothing. A strong frame says, I will feel it fully, but I will not let it rule me. That's power. Real power is not emotional numbness. Real power is emotional governance. You feel the pull, but you do not obey it. You feel the fear, but you do not hand it the microphone. You feel the loss, but you do not turn grief into self erasure. And this is where the person changes. The person who embodies these principles is not loud about it. They are not dramatic. They do not need to announce boundaries every 10 minutes. They do not confuse stillness with passivity. They are focused, grounded, disciplined, self respecting. When something feels off, they pay attention. When a pattern repeats, they do not romanticize it. When silence shows up, they do not sprint to break it. They let reality speak. They keep their routines. They protect their sleep. They train their body. They direct their mind. They do the work in front of them. They do not collapse because one area of life becomes uncertain. They become more organized, more sober, more exact. That person knows something most people never learn. Your emotions are real, but they are not always reliable instructions. Your urges are loud, but loud does not mean wise. Your attachment can feel sacred and still be destructive. Your desire can feel honest and still lead you straight into humiliation if it is not filtered through discipline. So that person pauses, breathes, watches, not because they are disconnected, but because they are responsible. Be that person. When the urge comes to reach for what is pulling away, pause. When the mind starts building stories out of silence, pause. When you want to send the long message, defend yourself, prove your value, correct the misunderstanding, rescue the connection, force the closure, pause. Ask the real question. Is this action aligned with self respect, or is it just an attempt to escape discomfort? Is this clarity, or is this craving? Is this discipline, or is this attachment begging for one more hit? You already know the answer more often than you admit. So here is what you stop. You stop chasing mixed signals. You stop arguing with patterns. You stop handing out access to people who have not demonstrated care, consistency, or character. You stop over explaining your heart to people committed to misunderstanding it. You stop measuring your worth by response time, attention, or emotional availability from people who are unstable themselves. You stop calling chaos chemistry. You stop calling anxiety intuition. You stop calling self abandonment love. And here is what you start. You start telling the truth quickly. You start respecting the first sign, not the 50th. You start redirecting energy into your craft, your health, your finances, your spiritual life, your discipline, your environment, your habits. You start becoming so internally organized that confusion outside you no longer has the power to dismantle you. You start protecting your mornings. You start training your body to remember what steadiness feels like. You start training your attention to return home instead of wandering into obsession. You start building a life that does not beg to be chosen because it is already chosen by you. That is self reclamation, not revenge, not performance, not moral superiority. Reclamation. You reclaim your time by not feeding dead end conversations. You reclaim your peace by not decoding every change in tone. You reclaim your dignity by not auditioning for places that only offer conditional acceptance. You reclaim your mind by refusing fantasy access to your decision making. You reclaim your life by remembering that your future cannot be built while your energy is chained to unstable patterns from the present. And understand this clearly: letting go is not always losing. Sometimes letting go is the first honest win you have had in a long time. Because now you are no longer at war with reality. Now you are no longer trying to turn absence into presence, confusion into commitment, inconsistency into safety. Now you are free to see what is there, not what you wished would be there. That freedom is expensive. It costs fantasy. It costs ego. It costs the hope that some people will become who they never showed signs of becoming. But once you pay that price, you get your life back. People talk about peace like it is soft. It is not soft. Peace is expensive. Peace requires standards. Peace requires endings. Peace requires the ability to disappoint your impulses. Peace requires the maturity to say, "This hurts, but I will not make it worse by abandoning myself." That is strength, quiet strength, clean strength, unshakable strength. So when the final test shows up, and it will, do not ask, "How do I make them understand?" Ask, "How do I remain true?" Do not ask, "How do I get the response?" Ask, "What does self respect require here?" Do not ask, "How do I hold on?" Ask, "What am I being shown?" The quality of your life changes when the quality of your questions changes. You are not here to chase every source of temporary relief. You are here to become someone solid, someone clear, someone whose emotions deepen their wisdom instead of hijacking their behavior, someone who can love without kneeling to confusion, someone who can care without collapsing, someone who can feel disappointment without making desperation their identity. That is the shift. You stop living as a reaction. You start living as a standard. And once that shift happens, everything changes. Your silence has meaning. Your no has integrity. Your distance has purpose. Your attention becomes valuable because it is no longer cheap. Your energy becomes focused because it is no longer leaking into every unresolved emotional trap. You become calmer, not because life got easier, but because you got clearer. You become stronger, not because nothing affects you, but because you finally learned that being affected is not the same as being controlled. Read that again in your mind. Being affected is not the same as being controlled. So stand up internally, tighten your standards, clean up your thinking, return to your routines, protect your attention, tell yourself the truth even when it burns, especially when it burns. Because the moment you stop begging life to spare your feelings and start demanding that your actions reflect your values, you stop being emotionally fragile. You stop being easy to shake. You stop being available for every pattern that wants your energy without earning your trust. This is your reminder that you do not need one more sign. You do not need one more explanation. You do not need one more emotional negotiation with what has already revealed itself. You need discipline. You need honesty. You need self respect with teeth. And if nobody told you this clearly, hear it now. You are not powerless in the silence. You are not defeated by distance. You are not broken because something did not choose you. The moment you choose truth over fantasy, discipline over attachment, and self respect over emotional begging, the test begins to turn in your favor. You are not waiting for the answer. You are the answer. So walk like it, think like it, decide like it, protect your mind like it, build your life like it. And if you want more of this, more truth, more clarity, more growth, and a place where you are challenged to rise instead of comforted into weakness, subscribe now. Stay here. Stay close. This is for people who are done lying to themselves and ready to become unshakable.